Carlos Sturgis. I'm an investigative reporter for the Dallas Express, and today we have Aaron Reitz, who is running for Attorney General for the state of Texas. He used to work for the Department of Justice under President Trump, and we're going to learn about his platform, what he plans to do as Attorney General for the state of Texas. And so, with that being said, I'm going to yield my time to Aaron Reitz, and he's going to tell us a little bit more of his background and, of course, what got him involved in this race.
Well, awesome. Glad to be here, Carlos. Thanks for taking the time with me. This is great to chat with you. So look, I believe that we're in a battle for the soul of our state and our nation. And I know from personal experience that the primary arena in which we are fighting the dark forces of the left over the soul of our state and our nation is the justice system. President Trump understood this when he ran for president during the 2024 cycle. He really prioritized his law and order agenda. He prioritized restoring fairness and transparency and confidence in an utterly broken, corrupt, left bent justice system. And it's also why I was one of the very first senior executives that he nominated to the Justice Department and brought in those senior ranks. And when he nominated me about a year ago, this month last year, he said, Aaron Reitz is a true MAGA attorney and a warrior for the Constitution. Now, on the one hand, that's exactly the kind of description that I think Texans want to have out of their next attorney general. But there's a reason why he called me a true MAGA attorney and a warrior for the Constitution. It's because he saw my background litigating, investigating, suing, defending, and appealing on all the major issues that Texans, and in particular Republican primary voters that share our values, really care about. And, you know, I went through Senate confirmation. I'm proud to say I got exactly 0 Democrat votes when I got confirmed. I would have been a little bit embarrassed had I got any of them. But when I got confirmed, the senior Democrat on the Senate Judiciary Committee, Dick Durbin from Illinois, he put out a full-blown press release when I got nominated, when I got confirmed. And he said, Aaron Reitz is a menace to democracy and a danger to the rule of law. Why? Because I have been leading legal troops in legal combat to advance our values, our agenda up and down the chain of the justice system. And look, it was the knowledge that with Ken Paxton leaving, he announced in early April, I announced in mid-June, that the stakes are simply too high to turn the keys to this mission essential office over to someone who's not ready. And I think when Texans look at my background, litigating, investigating, suing, defending, and appealing on all the major issues, they'll see that I'm uniquely qualified for this post. I think what's interesting, Carlos, is Texans have not had to choose an attorney general in an open primary, right, without the incumbency of Ken Paxton in over a decade. And so a lot of grassroots activists and leaders in our party and our movement, you know, they're looking at the Attorney General's office kind of with fresh eyes, without an incumbent. And folks are looking back at where this position comes from, right? Article 4, Section 22 of the Texas Constitution says, quote, the Attorney General shall represent the state of Texas in all courts and pleas. This is a legal law enforcement executive branch job. It is not a legislative job. And yet my opponents are running on their legislative record. I'm running on my legal record. And even before I was a lawyer, my background as an officer in the Marine Corps, an Afghanistan war veteran, someone who even as a law student was leading nationally recognized conservative legal organizations, someone who clerked on the Texas Supreme Court for now Chief Justice Jimmy Blacklock, someone who spent several years in private practice, then became Attorney General Ken Paxton's deputy, leading the state's fight against the Biden administration, against big tech, against big pharma, against these big blue cities and blue counties for election integrity and COVID lockdowns. Someone who was Ted Cruz's chief of staff, and then somebody who ultimately became the head of the Office of Legal Policy at DOJ. In my opinion, and I think a lot of Texans' opinions, it is someone with that kind of background that's uniquely suited to serve with effectiveness and excellence as the next chief legal officer of Texas. That's why I'm in this fight.
You mentioned about, George Soros backed district attorneys in the state of Texas. You know, there was a case here in Dallas County where the courts pretty much allowed an illegal alien. Here, I'm just going to read you what happened there. But this illegal alien was accused of a Mattel beheading, and basically they declined to seek the death penalty
Yeah.
for this illegal alien. I mean, what is your plan for district attorneys that just have gone rogue and supported violent criminals, even illegal aliens that are not American citizens?
Yes.
What is your plan to handling these DAs as Attorney General?
Yeah. So look, you're naming one of the worst district attorneys in the state of Texas, right there in Dallas County. I'm talking to you in Austin right now, where I live with my family. I know you're in Dallas primarily. And look, the Travis County DA, the Harris County DA, the Dallas County DA, and a handful of other DAs are the sort of poster children for what we loosely call Soros funded or Soros backed, left wing, pro criminal, anti-law and order district attorneys. These are the ones that are creating the hellscapes that often, too often, our big blue cities and our big blue counties are becoming. They shouldn't be that way in a state like Texas. Texas is red, Texas is Republican, Texas is conservative. Texans support law, order, justice. We do not support criminals, nor do we support the degradation of our communities, turning them into environments that are more favorable to criminals than it is to law-abiding citizens and families, right? And so what's my plan as Attorney General? There's a few things that I want to do. Number one is, as Attorney General, I will inherit vast constitutional, statutory, and regulatory powers to really smoke out these left-wing funded networks. Okay, the left is flooding the zone with money. Yes, it's George Soros. We talk about Soros because it's a shorthand, right? It is George Soros. He is backing these district attorneys, right? But it's more than that. The left has near infinite national and even international money. They are laundering that money in a complicated network of 501c3s, 501c4s, super PACs, political action committees, and direct candidate campaign funds. They are advancing. They are on the march in our big blue cities and our big blue counties. They're not even hiding it anymore, right? Now, in order to operate lawfully in the state of Texas, C3s, C4s, PACs, campaigns, and even for-profit corporate entities that are playing in this field as well, they have to abide by the law. There are certain restrictions on what they can or can't do with their money. There are restrictions on how they can or cannot receive their funds and distribute their funds. So one of the most important tools that I'll have as the next Attorney General is to really do a deep dive and expose the money laundering networks for which these rogue DAs are the beneficiaries, and they're turning our cities into places that are becoming uninhabitable. And so I don't want that to happen anymore. And not only can I expose them, but the powers that I have at my disposal to actually hold them accountable under state law. Where I don't have the power to hold them accountable under state law, I can make referrals to the federal government. Now, I think one of the advantages that I add to the table as a candidate and as an next AG is I'm somebody who's fully vetted, who just came from the Trump administration. So being able to partner with federal law enforcement to do justice here in Texas is, I think, tremendous, and certainly more than any of my opponents. And then we do have many allied district attorneys throughout the state of Texas. They typically are not presiding over, the big blue cities and the big blue counties, but we've got a lot of friends out there. I don't want to, throw the babies out with the bathwater here. There are good DAs. And so to the extent I can make referrals and partner with local DAs who are aligned with us, I think is key. The second thing that I want to do with respect to these rogue DAs is I actually want to affirmatively seek their removal from office. This is an important campaign theme that I've been running on for several months now. On day one, when I'm sworn in, I'm going to begin the investigatory and litigation process to remove the district attorneys of Harris County, Travis County, and Dallas County. And the method by which I'm going to do this is something called a quo warranto action. It's a Latin phrase. It basically, you go to a court and you make the argument that through a series of derelictions of duties, whether under their oath or the Texas Constitution, state law, local ordinances, and so on and so forth, that they have constructively abandoned their post. They have failed to provide law, order, and justice within their jurisdictions, and that therefore, under the common law cause of action known as quo warranto, and under related statutes, there are others, I'm not going to get into it right now, it gets a little too wonky, but it's fun and I love this stuff, is you can petition a court to declare that public official has functionally abandoned his post and it is functionally open and he or she is removed from office. That will spark a whole cascade of other appeals, potentially special elections and so forth. But if we have to do those things, we're going to do it on our Republican terms. We are not going to allow the district attorneys, the Soros-funded rogue DAs that are profiting off of crime, to turn our cities and counties into crime-ridden hellscapes anymore. So those are the two kind of major things that I want to do as the next Attorney General. And I think lastly, what I'll say, Carlos, is I wouldn't be surprised if all three of my other opponents will talk as big of a game. They're all going to say the same things. They're all going to say, I'm going to crack down on district attorneys. That's great. But you know what I have that they don't have? Experience actually doing it and getting it done. That's what I bring to the table. I was Ken Paxton's deputy for 3 years. I've run quo warranto plays and scored touchdowns many, many times. It's why Paxton endorsed me to succeed him. Why? Because I have the know-how, the experience, and the battle-tested legal record to actually get it done. And on my watch, these DAs are done.
You mentioned how, these DAs are interconnected with, these left-wing organizations. Dark money is also involved. There's been a lot of discussion on dark money from the radical left essentially being provided to these radical left-wing organizations like Antifa, transgender militia, socialist rifle associations, things like that, that have become violent. They have attacked ICE officers. Brown Berets is another one that they harass law enforcement. They instigate violence against law enforcement and ICE officers. And as a result of the violent rhetoric that they have been producing over the past several months, you've seen ICE officers getting shot. You saw an officer get shot in Alvarado, Texas, a couple months ago. And now, we had the Charlie Kirk assassination that happened a couple months ago. So what is your approach to dealing with radical left-wing violence that has been exploding across the country as the next AG?
Yeah, well, I do want to be very clear. I think that political violence in the modern era is a uniquely left-wing phenomenon. You just don't see these kinds of highly coordinated, well-funded, this network of student activist groups, Antifa, Trantifa, you named them all, right? You don't see these same sorts of phenomenon on the right. In almost every instance in which you see an example of so-called right-wing political violence, it is unequivocally lone wolves who have gone off the grid. They've not been radicalized by any sort of network of political movements. They're not part of the mainstream, and they typically overwhelmingly have like serious mental problems, but they've not been welcomed in any of the sort of right of center groups. They've not been groomed by any of the right of center groups. And when right-wing political violence ever happens, to the extent it does, it's so rare, I can't even really think of examples in the modern era. We Republicans are very swift to condemn it. We universally say, that's not how we want to do business. Yeah, we want to fight it out in the public sphere, but we don't want to resort to violence. Contrast that with the left. You already rightly diagnosed, Carlos, I think this vast network that exists. But it's that same network that is radicalizing students as early as middle school and high school. The radical groups' views on race, sex, politics, family, law, order, the political parties is just mainstream public school education curricula that only then gets worse once we send our young kids to universities, where it just becomes basically like it festers. It becomes a petri dish of radical left-wing ideology. And then when, surprise, they start referring to, over the course of many years, we Republicans as Nazis, fascists, warmongers, evil, Satan incarnate, whatever, when people like Joe Biden say it's time to stop discussing things and put a bullseye on Trump's head, like that sort of rhetoric and the political and activist ecosystem that gives rise to left-wing violence is profound, and I think has really reached a fever pitch. And so I want to be clear on the battle lines here. We are dealing with a national and internationally funded leftist activist cohort that is comprised of the media, political activist groups, get out the vote groups, race baiting type groups, messaging groups, and the heart of the Democratic Party that's operating all right here in Texas. So as AG, similar to what we talked about a moment ago about, really smoking out the left-wing Soros funded, rogue DA funding network that is pro-criminal and anti-law and order, some of the same tools are available to the AG to smoke out and hold accountable these violent leftist groups that are aiding and abetting, and even, most grossly, celebrating the violence, excusing the violence, which is what they all do, and it's very mainstream to do it. And so we're going to investigate them. We're going to hold them accountable. There are different ways to hold them accountable. If you're a 501c3, the Attorney General's office has what's called a charitable trust division, where those nonprofit corporate charters can be revoked. We're going to make sure you don't operate here in Texas. If they're operating in public institutions, for example, if they have safe harbor at any of our public universities, of which there are over 100 in Texas, if you're a public institution, you are harboring enemies of the state, enemies of the nation, enemies to the Constitution, I'm coming after you. And either the universities are going to face consequences, or if the universities take swift action, then I'm going to partner with them to hold these groups accountable. So investigation, litigation, using those two things with courage, with experience, with competence, with effectiveness, with energy, zeal, and really a clear mind about the nature of the enemy. When I talk about we're in a battle for the soul of our state and our nation, when I talk about being in a civilizational, existential conflict, spiritual conflict with the forces of the left, I'm talking about these groups that you just mentioned, Carlos, and I will muster every power at my disposal to get them out of Texas and behind bars, stripped of their money, stripped of their ability to operate in Texas. And I'm going to do it. Not only am I going to promise you that I'm going to do it, but I'm the only one in this field that has experience actually doing it. And so Texans don't have to wonder where I'm going to be on this. They can know based upon my legal record where I'm going to be, and we're going to put an end to this nonsense.
Yeah, since we're talking about violence, political violence that's been happening and that's been created by the radical left, there's been a lot of talk also about radical Islamic violence that we've seen over the past 2 weeks. The shooting that happened in Washington, D.C., where a National Guardsman was shot and killed, and another one was severely injured. And also a bomb terroristic threat that happened in Fort Worth, Texas. That individual has been arrested. He's in the Tarrant County Jail right now. But there's been renewed conversation on the threat of radical Islam, especially now since we're talking about the building of a Sharia law city in Collin County, Texas. And that's been discussed for many months. And I know the state and national leaders, they've been discussing on how to tackle that issue. I know the DOJ, I think they investigated briefly that Epic City construction. But as AG, how will you tackle the radical Islamic threat that's growing across not just Texas, but across the country as well? But how will you tackle it in the state of Texas?
Yeah, great question. And it's a huge issue. Let me first tell you what I believe about this issue, and then I'm going to tell you how I'm going to tackle it as the next AG. So first off, what do I believe? I believe that radical Islam is utterly incompatible with Western and in particular American civilization. I'm not talking about the nice Muslim neighbor that lives down the street or that may work with us, right? I'm not talking about the assimilable patriots who have learned English, love America, love our history, have escaped a terrible life in their former home country, have renounced loyalties to that home country and are loyal, devoted, patriotic Americans. Of course, there are many people who hold those views of many different colors and faiths and creeds and so on and so forth. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the Islamists who are very intentionally conquering. They are behaving as conquerors. They know what they're doing. I'm not being a conspiracy theorist when I say that. We need only to look at their own writings and speeches over the last century or half a century or so for exactly what the Islamists have planned for the West. They've already been massively successful in Europe, and on almost any major social phenomenon, Americans need only to look at Europe and then say, okay, America is only about 5 or 10 years behind. So in Europe, all of the most beautiful Western, just absolute sort of the pinnacles of Western civilization in France and in Italy and in Germany and in England, Spain, and so on and so forth, right? You have whole swaths of those cities that are now commonly referred to as no-go zones. Because if you've got the wrong skin color, or if you're not covering yourself up in the right way, or if you're not, stopping your day to accommodate the call to prayer that's happening multiple times per day, you're going to get harassed. Your life is at risk. Your property is at risk. You're going to be shunned. You're going to be attacked. You're not welcome to go there. These are no-go zones. In America, that has already taken root in some of our cities. We often talk about, Paterson, New Jersey, or Minneapolis, Minnesota, or Dearborn, Michigan, right? And these are radical Islamic enclaves where no Westerner, no Christian, no Jew would ever want to go for fear of his or her life and safety of both his or her body and property. Now, that is their plan. That is intentional. It is their version of civilizational conquest. They are out baby making us. They are bringing through chain migration all of their people with them. They are manipulating some of the looser edges of immigration law to fudge the numbers, to bring in multiple generations of people. They are then concentrating together. They are receiving public benefits that are costing law-abiding citizens like me and you in order to keep them on the government dole. And it's happening at a scale that I don't think many people are aware of, but I'm thankful that thanks to the work of you and many others like Laura Loomer or Amy Meck and some of these others who have really exposed the treacheries of what's happening here in Texas. So I want to be very clear. These Islamists are not welcome in Texas. They are not welcome in America, okay? And when I'm AG, now I want to tell you what I want to do, okay? I was the first candidate in this race who spoke with crystal clarity about the nature of the Islamist threat and what the state of Texas at the state level ought to do about it. Now, back in the spring, Attorney General Ken Paxton with Governor Abbott began launching a series of investigations. Those investigations are now really coming to fruition. We saw, Carlos, just a few days ago, the Attorney General on behalf of the state of Texas brought a lawsuit against Epic City and its corporate structure called Capital Community Partners, which ironically the shorthand is CCP. That's maybe a different conversation about China and its activities here in Texas, right? Which is of course a major concern as well. But they brought a lawsuit for violations of federal and state securities law. So once again, we're talking about holding these threatening groups accountable because of the money network that they have, right? Remember, how many mob bosses did we put behind bars for committing murder? Not many, right? But the feds understood this. When they went after the mafia in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, it was going to be very difficult to get the head mafiosos for commissions of murder and things like that. So what we got them on were the process crimes, financial crimes, human trafficking, drug trafficking, RICO, money laundering, tax fraud, tax evasion, and so on and so forth. The federal government created a legal ecosystem that so smoked out the mafia that it choked them out of commission to where they couldn't really operate at all. Now the most we hear about the mob is on movies that we like to watch, right? But they aren't mainstream now. The Islamists in Texas, in my opinion, when I'm AG, I'm going to treat the Islamists in Texas like the feds treated the mafia in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, which is bringing the entire force of the chief legal officer's constitutional, statutory, and regulatory powers, which are vast and numerous, against the Islamists to connect the dots. Where are they getting their money from? How are they dispersing their money? How are they inducing contributions to their various enterprises? And then with Governor Abbott about 2 or 3 weeks ago, declaring CARE, the Council for American Islamic Relations, and the Muslim Brotherhood as terrorist organizations, that executive order, and it lays it all out in Abbott's executive order, it unlocked over a dozen yet untapped state statutes, all of which have enforcement provisions with the Attorney General. So by declaring those two organizations, which are at the center of the Islamist money laundering scheme in Texas, as terrorists, it now gives the AG to go after them using the Texas Property Code, the Texas Health and Safety Code, the Texas Civil Practices and Remedies Code, and various other provisions in state statute that were otherwise unactivated, but now with the action of the governor, they're turned on, which now means Paxton has a whole new array of weapons to go after them. So whatever Paxton is starting right now to smoke them out, I, as Paxton's endorsed successor, am the one that can be relied on to carry it on to completion. So that entities like Epic City, which by the way, they've hired all the fancy PR firms now, they've renamed to the Meadow. It's not Epic City anymore. That's gotten a bad name. No. It's the Meadow. Who doesn't want to live in the Meadow? How could you attack the Meadow? Doesn't that sound nice? Right? But it's baloney. We all know exactly what they're doing. And I'm not going to let any of their nice naming conventions or their well-heeled law firms that they've hired up or their public relations firms that they've snatched up to put out new advertising materials. No, it's not going to be good enough. We're going to smoke you out. We're going to hold you accountable. We're going to pressure you. We're either going to get a judgment against you, or you can self-deport somewhere else, either in the country, not in Texas, or ideally back home to your Stone Age country overseas. That's what's going to happen when I'm AG.
I mean, I think that a lot of them just need to be deported because many of them are just against America. They're actually not even following the Constitution. If you actually follow, the stuff that they're reading, that they're actually following, they don't believe in the U.S. Constitution. They don't believe in the U.S. American law. They believe in their Sharia law, theocratic framework.
Yes.
And that is one of repression. That is one that is anti-Western. And as a result, you've seen terror in America. You've seen Islamification in some communities.
Yes.
And that happened under the Biden administration, where they allowed 80,000 Afghan nationals to just come over here. And now they've done terror attacks. I mean, last year, there were Afghan nationals that were caught trying to do a terror attack on election day.
Totally
and of course, they were caught by law enforcement. But it just goes to show that mass migration ultimately leads to the destruction of Western civilization,
Correct.
leads to the destruction of America. You've seen it in Europe where, in some cities, 15 or 20% of the city is now led by radical Muslims.
Totally
so
right.
Islam is incompatible with America, with Western civilization. And, they all just got to go. Most
I
of them
agree
have
with
got
you.
to
Look,
go.
Carlos, you've hit on a couple of things that are really of interest, not only to me personally, but I think directly affect how I'm going to lead as the next Attorney General. Okay, yeah, you're right. How many tens of thousands of these radical Islamists have committed some version of immigration or visa fraud by misleading federal law enforcement about their loyalties, about their fealties? When you become an American citizen, you have to swear allegiance to the United States, and you have to expressly forsake allegiance to the world that you left behind. And yet how many of them, had their fingers crossed behind their backs, knowing full well that they were coming here just to exploit our system, to conquer our system, and not assimilate to our system. And then on the Afghan issue, this one hits really close to home for me. I'm a Marine officer. I spent 5 years on active duty. I'm still in the reserve as a major. I'm a veteran of the war in Afghanistan. I deployed to the Northern Helmand province of Afghanistan. I live with the Afghan National Army. I then saw, several years later after Joe Biden, the shameful manner in which he withdrew from Afghanistan prompted this sort of, suicidal empathy to just open the floodgates into the United States. And they claim, oh, we're vetting these people. You can't vet these people. It's not actually possible to vet them. Even if you're making a commitment to vetting them, they're not vetable, if that makes sense, right? We can't actually know who these people are. And exactly to your point, Carlos, look, the bottom line here is if you import the third world, you become the third world. And that's exactly not only do what these third worlders want, they want to come here and, suck us dry of all of our resources and all of the kindness that your average American and that we give to the federal government and our tax dollars, right? But the Democrats also want this, right? The modern left actually hates American civilization. They hate Western civilization. They hate our heritage. They hate our faith. They hate the composition of our communities. And so out of that spirit of hatred, they have aided and abetted and facilitated and funded the mass invasion of not just illegal aliens, but third worlders with the intent to change the very composition of our country so that America is no longer the America that our forefathers were proud of. It's not even the America that one or two generations removed from you and I had, right? This is very intentionally an America that is by their design, and they're using weaponized immigration to accomplish their political and civilizational goals. And as AG, I am going to stand in the gap and do everything I can in my power to not only stop that, but in fact, reverse it. And that's what I'm committed to doing as AG.
One of the last questions for the interview, since we're talking about radical Islam and how we've been importing, these Muslims into the U.S. and how they're just incompatible with Western civilization, all because, you have Democrats and elected officials that have this suicidal empathy that we just need to import the whole world and, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Everyone's going to have kumbaya. That's just not the case. I mean, you don't see that in China. You don't see that in Russia. You don't see that in Japan. It's essentially the great replacement. That's what's happening in America and Europe.
Yes.
But talking about that, we've seen tens of millions of violent illegal aliens cross the southern border. Not just that, but also overstay their visas. They travel through an airport. They overstayed their visas, but it's been tens of millions of violent illegal aliens. I know President Trump, he's already self-deported 2 million of them, and more than 500,000 have been deported by ICE. But as AG, what is your plan, in tackling the illegal immigration crisis that has unfortunately hurt America over the past 4 years under the Biden administration? And then the other one, the second question under the immigration topic is, there's been talk about illegal aliens sucking up taxpayer dollars in schools, in universities. And I understand that the Supreme Court ruled in the 80s that technically you're supposed to provide education even to illegal aliens. If they're students, then you need to provide them education. But, will there be a mechanism in the future to ultimately overturn that? Because that's billions of dollars going to illegal aliens that really that money should be going to Americans.
Yeah, totally right. So first off, let me just agree with your premise that we have been invaded. Invaded is the word. We have been invaded by tens of millions of illegal aliens. My bottom line is, if you are here breaking federal immigration law, you deserve nothing but arrest, detention, and deportation. That's what you deserve. I understand that right now, as we go through the 4 years of the Trump administration, I agree with the president. We want to prioritize, right? So we're going to start with the worst of the worst, the face-tatted types, the gangbangers, the traffickers, both human and drug type. We want to get rid of them first, not just as a proof of concept, but to show Americans what a a pro-border security, anti-illegal immigration administration and law enforcement apparatus can really accomplish for our communities. And I think it's been very effective so far. But I want to be clear. You deserve deportation, not just because you came here illegally and then also committed crimes, even though I would prioritize you as number one for deportation. You have broken federal law if you just exist here illegally. And you are having adverse effects on social services, on the housing market, both in terms of renting and buying. You are having adverse effects on the healthcare system because you're flooding emergency rooms because you don't have documents. You're destroying and skewing the insurance industry, especially car insurance, because we're all having to live in a increased risk. I guess the risk profile is increased because now you have people who are uninsured, and in order to compensate for that, insurance companies have to drive up premiums of law-abiding people because they're the only ones that they can identify. And then set all that aside about the social cohesion that is eroded when you import and open the floodgates of illegal alien invaders, in particular from the third world, who not only are not willing to assimilate, but actually unable to assimilate, unlike prior generations of immigration, say 120 years ago or so. And so, look, if you're here illegally, you deserve nothing but identification, arrest, detention, and deportation. Now, as Attorney General, on the one hand, I'm not primarily responsible for enforcing federal immigration law. That is the purview of the federal government, okay? Now, however, the Attorney General of Texas stands at a critical and mission essential nexus to bring federal immigration law enforcement resources to partner then with local law enforcement. And the AG stands right at the center of that, where the AG can help facilitate the partnership between the feds, state law enforcement, local law enforcement. And there are all kinds of legal mechanisms that he can do, that he can use in order to facilitate and really strengthen that partnership to make sure all the oars are rowing in the right direction. No one in this race is better equipped to do that than the guy who was a senior executive under President Trump at the Justice Department. Someone who, when I announced for Attorney General, our favorite border czar, Tom Homan, on the day that I announced, put out a statement of support saying I would do a tremendous job continuing to serve Texas effectively in my new endeavors. This is exactly why the National Border Patrol Council, that represents the United States Border Patrol, they endorsed me as the next Attorney General. Why? Because they saw my record litigating, investigating, suing, defending, and appealing on all of the major illegal immigration and border security related issues. You know, when I was Paxton's deputy, I'm proud to say I sued the 46th president 46 times. I won 85% of those cases. And I'd say nearly 20 of those 46 lawsuits were on border security and on illegal immigration. We did everything we could from our position as a state to thwart, slow down, or stop the invasion of our country. We were successful where we could be. Now that we've got Trump, we've got an ally in the White House, and you've got a former senior DOJ official who President Trump called a true MAGA attorney and a warrior for the Constitution, who's ready to not only secure the border, to stop the flow of illegal immigration, but to actually remove them from the state and the nation. Now, lastly, Carlos, you asked me about sort of the burden that illegal aliens have provided on sort of our social systems. What are the social or economic costs? I mentioned some of those, and it touches everything: housing markets, insurance markets, financial markets, public utilities, infrastructure. It hurts all of these things. But you bring up a really interesting case from the 1980s. It's called the Plyler case, in which the Supreme Court very narrowly, in a 5-4 decision, concluded that there is an obligation for public school districts to provide the children of illegal aliens, so illegal children, right, with a public education, which costs billions of dollars just in Texas. I don't know how many trillions it costs around the country, but just in Texas, it is costing the taxpayers billions of dollars to educate illegal aliens. I mean, it's almost unconscionable when we're living in Texas. What do Texans care about? They care about the skyrocketing property taxes, skyrocketing cost of living, reduced affordability. Well, look, if these school districts are constitutionally obligated, quote unquote, to educate illegal alien children to the tune of billions of dollars, well, it's no surprise that we're now having to, that these local school districts are having to like scrounge for money. Well, what if we deported all of them? What if we removed all of them? What if we challenged that Plyler decision from the 1980s to say, no, there's no constitutional requirement to educate someone who's actively breaking the law? Absolutely not. Get out of here. How stable or reduced would we then find those local entity tax burdens be reduced? It remains to be seen because no one has ever really tested this. Now, how do we reverse Plyler? How do we get a ruling out of the U.S. Supreme Court to reverse this 5-4 decision, of which the dissent is extremely well written in that case, and it provides the roadmap? Well, as Attorney General, I'm going to work with the legislature. The legislature will have to declare that funds, public education funds, cannot be routed to illegal aliens, or there are different ways to do this. You could require proof of citizenship before you can enroll in a public school, in a local school district. They actually don't do that right now, and the reason why they don't do that is because of the Plyler decision. They don't do it because they believe it'll get struck down. So what I want to see happen is the legislature say public funds cannot be used to educate the children of illegal aliens, which are illegal aliens themselves, even though they're children. And I want to see school districts start running immigration checks to ensure that only those students that are enrolled are here legally. As soon as that happens, Carlos, there will be a barrage of litigation in every single corner of the state. The left will throw everything that they've got, all of the same kinds of minority rights groups, illegal immigrant groups, all these left-wing funded groups, the same ones that challenged the state on its A Big Beautiful Map, which we won blessedly just a few days ago, which was a great decision. But it's the same types of groups, leftist, activist, legal entities will immediately sue Texas and the various school districts, arguing constitutional violations of Plyler. We will then say, me as the Attorney General, I will pick up the mantle to defend the state's actions, and we will litigate that all the way up to the Supreme Court and expressly ask the Supreme Court to overturn the 1980s decision known as Plyler. I expect that given the composition of the court today in the 2020s, that we would actually be victorious. It was just 5-4. It's not like it was an 8-1 or a 9-0 decision. I mean, it was a terrible decision on its face, and it won only narrowly. It is begging to be overturned. And I'm the only one in this Attorney General's race who has experience launching strategic litigation and appeals to accomplish exactly these kinds of outcomes. My opponents have no idea what they are doing in this regard. They may come on your show and say, oh yeah, no, I think that's a wrong decision. And they will not know how to run these plays. Or they might chat GPT how to do it before they come on your show and tell you how they're going to do it. But they've never actually done it. They don't have the battle scars. They don't have the ribbons on their chest that shows that they've been in combat and have actually vanquished enemies to advance our values. I have. And when it comes to deporting illegal aliens, securing the border, and launching strategic litigation and appellate strategy to accomplish our objectives, I'm the only one that's done it, and I'm going to continue to do it as the next Attorney General of Texas.
Last two questions. The other question I have is, how will you combat the transgenderism, the LGBTQ DEI ideology that is still in schools? It's still in some universities, even though there's been some progress. It's still seen, and there are cases that come up. So, how will you combat that?
Yeah. So I would say first, I think going after those things is going to be similar to the approach that we talked about earlier about smoking out this network, this vast network of leftist activist groups that are flush with cash. They're operating in many of our public institutions. They are particularly zealous and active on college campuses. And look, I thank the Texas legislature for making a lot of these things illegal in our public institutions, right? They have not yet taken action to stop it happening in the private sector, although that can sometimes be legally complex. I don't buy that as an excuse, by the way, and I will advise the legislature as the next AG during the 2027 session how we can, really ratchet it up even further to make sure that even private entities are not safe from attempting to trans our children. But in the public education sphere, look, a public institution, whether it's K through 12, whether it is a state entity, whether it's a college institution, whether it is a local political entity at the county, civil, or municipal level, or whatever it may be, you cannot use money or resources to provide or to in any way what we'll use in the broadest possible sense, the sort of trans agenda. You can't have a tranny bathroom, for example, in a local city hall. That is illegal. You cannot teach either in K through 12 or higher education that there are not just more than two genders, but an infinite amount of genders. And, let's provide you with the resources in order to be able to do that sort of thing. And that is illegal in Texas. You cannot open up women's private spaces to biological males. That also is illegal. But here's an important distinction that I think voters really need to understand. And I think that they're coming to understand this as they're thinking about who they want as their next AG. You can promulgate laws all day long. You can pass bills. You can get them through the upper and the lower chamber. You can send them to the governor's desk. You can have your signing ceremony. You can have those laws that we like, that me and you and our viewers and your readers like. And as soon as the ink dries on the governor's signature and the new statutes that we're high-fiving each other for get reprinted in the law books and then put up on the shelves, that is exactly the moment that the Attorney General steps in and breathes life to those laws. The end of the legislative process is the beginning of the Attorney General's process. And so even though we've got good laws on the books that empower state officials and law enforcement officials like me as the future Attorney General, unless you have an AG that knows how to go into the law library, strategically select the appropriate books off the shelves, and then really breathe life to them and turn the dead letters into actual, active, alive weapons and tools to advance our America First and conservative Republican law and order agenda, it's all for naught. And as AG, this is what distinguishes me from my opponents, is I'm absolutely committed to smoking out and holding accountable, stopping and reversing the wokeification of so many of our institutions, public and otherwise, in every corner of the state of Texas. But my opponents will tell you the same thing. The difference between me and them is that I actually know how to do it. I actually know how to launch a multi-pronged investigation. I actually know how to take the fruits of an investigation and bring affirmative litigation strategically in different jurisdictions in both state and federal court. I actually know how to win there, and then if we lose there, bring things up on appeal so that we maximize the likelihood of getting an outcome that Texans really want. That is such an important distinction between me and my opponents. Everyone's going to say, oh yeah, I'm against the wokeification. I'm against the radical LGBTQ agenda. I'm against putting biological men into women's and girls' private spaces or sports. That's great. We're all for that. The question is, who do you trust to actually effectively get it done? And that's what I do. I've been doing it my whole life, leading legal teams into legal combat to advance our objectives up and down the chain of the justice system. And whether you're talking about Islamification, rogue DAs, fraudulent, wasteful local governments, woke DEI pushing K through 12, public schools, higher ed, or political subdivisions in the state, I know how to do all that stuff. And I'm ready to run these plays, run the plays and score touchdowns for Texas. That's what I do, and that's what I've done my whole life.
Any last comments that you want to leave for the viewers?
Yeah, well, look, I would just say this again. Thank you for having me, Carlos. I always love to tell folks on the campaign trail that the very first time I ever swore an oath to the United States Constitution was as a brand new second lieutenant in the Marines. I was 22 years old. My hair was fast approaching its current state that you see right now. And I raised my right hand and I said, I, Aaron Reitz, do solemnly swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Now, as somebody who came up in the era of the war on terror, somebody who eventually deployed to Afghanistan, back then I primarily thought about the foreign enemies to our Constitution. And to be clear, we have a lot of foreign enemies to our Constitution, and I do think about them often. The next time that I swore that oath was in the West Wing, and I had my wife and 4 children on my left hand. I had Attorney General Pam Bondi on my right hand. I raised my right hand and I said the exact same oath. And yet, in those intervening nearly 20 years, from as a brand new officer in the Marines to a senior most executive under Trump's DOJ, I came to realize that, in fact, the greatest threats to our Constitution today are actually captured in that second clause of that same oath, the domestic enemies of the Constitution. And even though I wasn't wearing a uniform in that moment, and even though I wasn't holding a gun in that moment, and I didn't have special rank insignia on my collar in that moment, I nevertheless took the oath to protect and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, with the same gravity and sense of purpose. What's interesting, Carlos, is when I get sworn in as the next Attorney General in January of 2026, we still got a primary we got to get through, maybe a runoff, then a general. So there are still many other steps. But in January 2027, when I get sworn in the well of the state Senate, I will raise my right hand and I will repeat the exact same oath word for word. And so President Trump trusted me to lead legal teams into legal combat, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Trump called me a true MAGA attorney and a warrior for the Constitution. He trusted me to do it. Senator Cruz trusted me to do it. Attorney General Ken Paxton trusted me to do it. It's why he endorsed me to succeed him. The Chief Justice of the Texas Supreme Court trusted me to do it. And so now on the campaign trail, the message that I'm sharing with voters is it is now my turn to ask you, the people, the sovereign people of Texas, to trust me to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, but now as the next Attorney General of Texas, and that's my commitment.
Aaron Reitz, I appreciate you coming to the show and, of course, answering these questions. And where can viewers, go and check out your page? Like, what's your social media and links?
Yeah, sure. So folks can start on my homepage, which is aaronreitz.com, AARONREITZ.com. From there, we link to all of our socials. But I'm very active on X, on Instagram, on Facebook, get on our mailing list, all those things. They links to the website. But if you just do a Google search for Aaron Reitz, REITZ, it's going to pop up. So follow me on all the socials. And for those who feel inclined, click that contribute button on my homepage as we close out 2025.
All righty. Well, I appreciate it, Aaron, and appreciate the interview and you answering the questions.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, Carlos. This was great. Appreciate you.
Thank you.